Although many believe that yoga is all about becoming more flexible, it is more accurate to say that from a physical aspect, yoga is about achieving musculoskeletal balance. The aim is to find balance between mobility and strength. Let's start by taking a look at mobility. The definition of mobility is to move or be moved freely and easily. When referring to the human body, it helps to think of this as the range of motion attainable around any given joint. When considering mobility of a joint, it's helpful to understand that our bones are the biggest limiting factors. For instance, the degree to which you can externally or internally rotate your femur bone, your thigh, will ultimately depend on the size, the shape, and orientation of your femur head, your femur neck, your hip socket. If one person has very side-oriented hip sockets and the person next to them has very front-oriented hip sockets, the external rotation in a pose like three-legged dog will look very different from mat to mat. We are all born with unique skeletal ranges of motion. This is because bones are formed in a spiral helix, which means that they all have unique twists and torques, making them each a bit different. It's even likely that your left humerus, your upper arm bone, has a slightly different shape than your right. This skeletal range of motion is not something that we will ever change with yoga postures. This understanding of the body often brings great relief to yoga students who find it impossible to reach a certain aesthetic in a pose after years of practice. It is also the reason why, on occasion, a brand new yoga practitioner can pop right up into a stunning back bend suitable for the cover of Yoga Journal. They were simply born with lots of space in their spine. Then why are we stretching, you might ask? Although we will never change our skeletal structure, we do have the ability to change the state of our soft tissues. To some degree, our daily life habits shape our soft tissue structures, muscles, tendons, and ligaments. If we spend lots of time in our computer or on our smartphone, it is likely that the soft tissues of our upper back are overstretched and those of our front shoulders and chest are bunched and tightened. If much of our day is spent seated, the front of our hips tend to take on that closed-in shape, while our backside becomes soft and flattened. No one wants that. We also develop set points in our ranges of motion. As a child, you probably had the ability to easily squat down and reach way underneath the car to retrieve drop keys. But if you rarely use these particular ranges of motion as you age, you eventually lose them. Our bodies are definitely on a use it or lose it plan. If we spend our lives doing the same things, same limited movements, day after day, our physiology will adapt to only accommodate these movements. Keep in mind, this pertains to us even if we are physically active. If we choose to run every single day without ever moving our bodies in different ways, there will be certain loss in ranges of motion. Same thing goes if all we ever do is the same yoga postures day after day. This use it or lose it is not only a musculoskeletal phenomenon, but highly involves neural mapping and our brain's ability to coordinate the movements. Really, every single thing we do involves the mind-body connection. Yoga is not about gaining excessive mobility. Rather, it encourages us to utilize all of our natural full ranges of motion. The stretching, reaching, twisting, folding, and extending are not about achieving pretzel status, but about returning us to an optimally functioning mobile sound structure. Stretching is beneficial as long as it's not taken too far and is always balanced with strengthening. Returning back to this idea of not being able to change our skeletal ranges of motion to achieve certain yoga postures, we can indeed change the state of our soft tissues, if that's the limiting factor, to get into fuller expressions and openings. For example, if someone can't achieve a back bend because of very tight chest muscles and fascia, eventually upon returning these muscles to their natural state with chest opening stretches, the shape of the posture will change. It's worth mentioning that the many spinal articulations found in yoga are unlike any other physical practice. Even if someone is very fit from other forms of exercise, in order to sustain a healthy body, it's vital to maintain spinal movement in extension, which is backward bending, flexion, which is forward rounding, axial rotation, which is twisting, and axial extension, which is vertical expansion, and then lateral flexion, which is side bending. All of these movements are found in yoga. The spine is composed of bony vertebrae along with softer intervertebral discs. The degradation of these discs is one of the #1 causes of chronic pain. The varied movements of the spine help to maintain vitality, lubrication, and fresh blood supply to the disc, prolonging their optimal function. Can you imagine how a joint would function if we placed huge emphasis on stretching to increase mobility while dismissing strengthening? We would actually be creating instability and the perfect setup for injury. Unfortunately, this sometimes happens in yoga when someone is really striving to achieve an aesthetic ideal. This is a good reminder of how important it is to practice body awareness while keeping our ego in check during our practice. Just like everything else in life, it's always valuable to ask, what purpose is this serving? When we learn to embrace the practice of awareness on our mats, the understanding of the mind-body connection expands. The reality is that the mind-body connection is never not happening. It's just that the more we understand it, the more we can direct it rather than be the victim of it. More on this later. The type of strength we strive for on the mat is functional strength, which is basically a strength which supports being strong and able in our bodies for everyday life. It's nice to be able to toss a bag over your shoulder and reach into the back seat to pick up a baby carrier holding an infant without throwing your back out. If we can dig in the backyard and move rocks without hurting ourselves, I'd say we've extended our optimal well-being. In order to cultivate functional strength, it is vital to do lots of movements which require integration of full body rather than isolation of one part. I like to teach the idea of cylindrical core, in which our front torso is fully collaborative with our back torso. Imagine a cylinder wrapped all the way around from belly to back. In movements like Warrior 3, where arms and one leg are fully extended, activating the cylindrical core teaches us how to integrate our strength in a way that works in the real world. In comparison, if we focus solely on doing things like crunches or leg lifts for core strengthening, which is isolating and shortening the front body muscles, we'd eventually create an imbalance in our structure that would quite possibly make us more vulnerable to injury while doing things like lifting rocks or working in the garden. Noticing correlations between different parts of the body and how one affects the other can be very helpful to wire into our awareness. For instance, in something like a forward fold position, understanding how straight or bent legs affects our spine mobility and or shape will help keep our back healthy while doing other things. The goal is to move away from unconscious patterns of movement towards more conscious, healthy movement. The great thing is that the only way to do this is by practicing awareness, unraveling habit, and choosing something new. All amazing things to practice in our lives. A great yoga teacher knows that these portable gifts are the most empowering things we can offer our students.